Hello. The Divine Code reading for December 18th, pages 387 and 388. We are in the chapter Details and Examples of the Prohibition of Murder, starting the subchapter on euthanasia. Topic number 15. Killing a mortally sick or injured person, or gasis, the Hebrew term for a dying person who has become morbid and whose death is imminent, is considered murder, and this carries liability to capital punishment. See the Rambam Laws of Kings 9:4 and Laws of Murderers 2:7. If a victim was close to dying as a result of one person's act of murder, and another person dealt the victim a final blow, such as decapitation, both are liable by the court if they intended to kill, meaning that each one knew his action would cause the victim to die. A person is not exempt from punishment if he hastens someone's death in order to lessen the suffering, even if the victim who was mortally injured by another person. As explained below in topic 17, that's tomorrow's reading. Also see part 1, footnote 87, regarding one who inadvertently neglected to learn the precepts of the Noahide commandment. So if a person is close to death, the person that caused that to happen, if someone caused it to happen with the intention of murdering, caused the person to be close to death, the first person would be liable in a court of law. Also, if someone else did something to hasten the death, that second person is also liable in a court of law. The last perpetrator, it's the second person who did the final act. See Minhag Kinot Commandment 34, or Shameach Hilkot Rotsei 2:4 Igrit Moshe Choshen Mishpat, Volume 2, Chapter 73. So this has been, questions come up a lot in the rabbinic literature. Since he made the final murderous blow, that's the second person made the final murderous blow, and the first. So the question, the first person, if he didn't actually do the action of killing, why would he be counted towards it? Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg agrees that the second person who struck and subsequently killed a mortally wounded victim is liable, and therefore it is also correct that one who kills a gasis is liable, even according to the sages, Tractate Sanhedrin 78, who hold the gasis who came to his situation as a victim of a person's action is judged to be the same as a mortally wounded person. So the person that is right, so we had earlier, we were discussing laws regarding a mortally wounded person who one person does an act of murder. It's a similar situation here. It's the same, basically it's the same. I can imagine how it's a different situation that is a mortally wounded person. So the laws are the same in either case. However, he questions if the first of the two people who struck the mortally ill victim is liable. For according to Torah law, a Jew who struck a victim first is exempt if a second person then struck and thereby killed the victim. and is therefore liable for murder. So within the Jewish law, if the second person came and did the final act of killing the victim, the first person would be exempt. Also, Tosafot on Tractate Sanhedrin 78a asks why the first of two people who struck a gausis should be exempt. It is a general rule. If, as a general rule, most people in a gausis condition will not recover. Tosafot answers there that the Torah law requires a striker to be held in jail until it's determined if the victim died from his action. So a person would not be considered a murderer unless the other person died, unless the victim died. So they have to wait to see if the victim dies before they would count the first person a murderer. Thus, it stands to reason that we don't automatically make it the first striker liable just on the basis that the majority of cases a gausis will die, and therefore it is considered that only the second final striker has killed the gausis. It is unclear from the opinion of Tosafot if a Gentile who is the first of the two to strike a gausis is exempt on the same grounds, or if the majority rule is followed, making the first striker also liable since he gives what is considered a lethal blow, which is the opinion of Rod Rama on Tractate 78. So there's a rule in the Jewish court that you have to wait for the victim to die before a person is tried for murder. So if someone comes along in that interim period and murders the victim, the second attacker murders the victim, then the first person did not actually commit murder because the person did not die from his action. The second person kind of cut off the death process, and so the first person would not be considered a murderer. So the question is whether or not that would apply within a Noahide court of law. The author responds. That's I would assume the author of the Divine Code, but it's not clear who. It might be Rabbi Goldberg. Responds that there is no source in Torah for requiring a Gentile to be jailed while it is being determined if his action will result in a victim's death. Although there is obviously a logical allowance for a Noahide court to do this, it has no bearing on whether or not the person will be liable according to Torah law. Rather, the Torah law for Gentiles follows the majority of situations, as Tosafot writes. See topic 20 below. So this will be discussed more often. What's called the majority of cases. In the majority of cases where a person is injured a certain way, the victim dies. It's expected, the medical expectation, the doctor check the victim, the medical expectation that the person's going to die. Someone comes while the person's in the process of dying, someone comes along and murders the person. Because the first person, first of all, the intention was to murder. The first person had the intention to murder, and he did an action to do the murder. And the action is expected by a medical opinion to be resulting in the person's death. According to how it's explained by Rabbi Goldberg and by Rabbi Weiner, that the non-Jew would be liable for murder. The first non-Jew would be liable for murder because that's the expectations the person was going to die. And that'll be explained more in chapter 20. That's in a couple days. Since his actions, that's the first person's actions, would surely have brought death without the actions of the second. This is murder after murder in topic 3 above. So we have the complicated case of the water going into an enclosed space that will drown the person, and someone either increases the water flow or decreases it or does something that the second person is also involved in the murder. The question is whether or not the first person is still considered a murderer. The second person, it's a complicated thing that was talked about a couple days ago. And that's still that same principle is still at play in this area. However, one who hastened the death of a living carcass. See Rambam, The Laws of the Principal Impurities, Chapter 2. So within the laws of impurity, a dead person gives off, a dead Jewish person would give off impurity to another Jewish person. So there's of course a very important question in the Jewish halakha as to when is a person considered dead, and there's various ways of looking at that. So the gassus is a person who is close, he's in the process heading towards death. And now we have the living carcass, which is like right on the verge. One who hastens the death of a living carcass is exempt from capital punishment by the court. A person in this condition is considered to already be dead and not in the category of a gassus. A gassus is considered fully alive, as explained in Shulchan Aruch Even HaEzer, chapter 121, and Yoredeah, chapter 370. Examples of a living carcass are one whose body was split in two, or one whose back was ripped from behind like a fish, or one whose thigh with its cavity was removed, or one whose neck and most of the surrounding flesh was broken. That is before the person dies while the heart is still beating. So the person's there's no surviving for that person in that state, and he's right on the verge of dying. In that case, someone that killed him, he's already halachically considered in a state of death, to the extent that a person who came along and hastened his death, in that case, for a very short hastening, that person would be considered exempt in a Torah court, in a Noahide Torah court. Chapter 6, topic 16. It is forbidden to even touch a dying person. Now, I assume this is referring to the living carcass stage, where the person is right on the verge of dying. Even to close his eyes, since doing so might hasten the person's death, which is forbidden within the prohibition of murder. Shulchan Aruch Yoredeah 339, Igrit Moshe Koshin Mishpat, Volume 2, Chapter 73 says that this law applies as well to Gentiles. So the person is a gassus, it's still considered a possibility that he's going to live. Therefore, obviously, for medical purposes or even for emotional purposes, it would be okay to touch the person. He might die in a couple days. The closer that a person gets to death, it becomes more important to ease the emotional state for the person. And the more contact that is made with this world, asking the person to sign wills, or so those kind of things are distressing. Having strong emotional activity with the family, that can be distressing for the dying person. Having someone grab the person and say, please don't leave, that can be distressing for the person. We want the person that is in the process of dying to have as peaceful of a passing as possible. And therefore we have the rules concerning not touching the person. That's sort of on a scale as it gets closer to death. Withdraw, allow the person peace. Therefore, this would be in the more advanced stages of the gases, is what it's talking about here. However, one who is trying to revive a gases or lessen his suffering is clearly allowed to touch the stricken person in the course of trying to save or help him. So as we saw in the last topic, a person who is mortally wounded might be able to survive. You get him to the ICU, you get him the medical help that he needs, and he might be able to survive. So that's definitely to be done as realistic as possible to try to save the person's life. Shavud Yaakov, Volume 1, Chapter 13, Bir Halakha 329, and Igrit Moshe's Mishpat, Volume 2, Chapter 73. And indeed, it is commendable to do so. See response of Tzitz Eleazar, Volume 13, Chapter 87, and Volume 14, Chapter 103. However, from the moment that the doctor knows that it is impossible to help the gases at all, it is forbidden to touch him. So the doctor's going to know from experience, unfortunately, he's going to know one person is possible to help the person, another person, there's not much you can do for the person. That's a decision that it's the whole idea is to give a peaceful passing for the person. He's going on to what's beyond life, and to allow that process to go as calmly as possible for him. Thank you.